Hello everyone and welcome to Changing Our Planet, Changing Our Minds. I'm Angela Chan and I'm your co-host this evening. I'm a creative climate change communicator, meaning that I'm a curator, researcher and artist focused on climate change issues, and I make art exhibitions and projects as Worm Art and Ecology. Very exciting to have you all join us. It's our first online event for young people developed by our Youth Ambassadors for young people. Wellcome Collection is a free museum and library exploring health, life and our place in the world. Wellcome Collection buildings are closed at the moment, so it's great to be able to come together and explore these ideas and have these discussions. This section of the event will be auto-captioned, as will the Q&A. There are subtitles for the panel discussion, which have been transcribed by stage text. If you need to turn on your captions, you can do so now, as shown on the slide. This is our schedule for the evening. In a moment, the ambassadors will introduce themselves, as well as their project exploring climate and the key themes for tonight. We also have the rest of the ambassadors on a chat, and you can say hello. And some of them are illustrating these discussions to share afterwards. Then we'll meet our speakers in their presentations and a short group discussion, which was recorded last week. After that, at 7:25, we're really excited to hear some audience questions, and our speakers will be joining us live to answer them and have a conversation about some of these ideas. Then we'll wrap up at 7:55 and the event will be over by 8 p.m. A little bit about how this platform works. There is a live chat through which you can discuss the speaker presentations throughout. We will open the Q&A for you to post questions soon. This chat is being monitored as we want to ensure that everyone can have a positive experience, and this is a safe space for people to share their ideas. Please communicate respectfully and follow those guidelines which have been shared with you in the chat now. Taking care of that, we have our moderators, Kerry and Adrienne from the Visitor Experience team, and our youth programme producer, Anna and Claire. You also have the ability to get in contact with a moderator at any time if you are struggling with the platform or have another question or need some support. We have also shared a glossary with you via our reminder email, which we'll send up with a follow-up email as well if you didn't receive that. Lots of ideas, hopefully really interesting, but might be the first time you've heard these ideas, so it helps them to break them down. And over to our ambassadors. Here are Joycelyn, Petal and Victor.
So hello, we are the Wellcome Collection Youth Ambassadors. We're a group of young people who represent the youth of the Wellcome Collection that come together regularly to talk about different issues that affect us and the world around us. Although you may not be able to see all of us right now, we have a few ambassadors in the chat. We listen to each other's perspectives on certain matters whilst educating and getting to know each other. Once a year, we come together on a project about a topic that we've been focusing on throughout the year. This year, we've been focusing on climate change. And since January, we've been working on our Changing Our Planet, Changing Our Minds project.
We want to raise awareness about the challenges of climate change and how it is so much more of an issue than some people think it is. And in doing so, explore different and perhaps less obvious aspects and ways that climate change affects societies. This is why we have chosen 3 speakers that will provide 3 different perspectives, focusing on food, fashion, and the future, surrounding the question, in a society which isn't set up for us to make ethical choices, how do we begin changing to fairer and more eco-friendly practices?
Additionally, we also want to give you, the audience, a fresh perspective on the issue of climate change and make you understand what you can really do to make a difference and to help tackle this issue, perhaps more than just taking out the recycling every Tuesday night. And that an individual can make a difference if they really try, so we also want to make you feel empowered. Not only, but we also want to challenge you in your views on climate change. You don't have to necessarily agree or disagree with our views or opinions, but we would like you to take from this something to consider and perhaps think about. And ultimately, we encourage people to get more involved in climate change movements, feel empowered and confident, and join the effort in lessening the impact of climate change.
Thanks to our ambassadors, and I'll give a quick introduction to all of our speakers who will be presenting their work with us. First off, we have Joycelyn Longdon, who is a PhD climate researcher studying the application of artificial intelligence to climate change. She founded the Instagram account Climate in Colour, and as a diasporic woman of colour, her work focuses on ensuring that Indigenous knowledge systems and marginalised voices are represented in climate science. Also, we have Annie Mckinnon, whose practice lies between research, video, and design to investigate socio-political aspects within sustainability and speculative futures. She is currently studying for an MA in fashion at the Royal College of Art. And Rory Parker. Sean Roy Parker is an artist, environmentalist, and cook. He studies the life cycle of materials, complexities of civic responsibility, and building community through collaboration and alternative currencies. He ran Brixton Pound Cafe, a pay-what-you-can cafe using surplus food. And now we'll be watching the pre-recorded presentation, starting with Sean Roy. Thanks. Hello, and thank you to our speakers for agreeing to chat with us and present your work. First off, we're going to start with Sean Roy, who is an artist and cook. Would you like to start presenting your work to us, please?
Hello, everyone. Yes, as well as artist and cook, I would also say that I'm an eco-activist environmentalist. So my practice usually is to do with the life cycle of materials. I think a lot about natural versus synthetic, and using our hands versus more robotic making. And predominantly my work is around collaboration and problem solving too. So I have a studio practice, maybe you could show a slide, which is sort of a visual art practice. And it's using found materials, lots of natural and synthetic debris. And I want to look at pre-industrial craft techniques. This image is of eco-dyeing, but using post-consumer materials, so kind of integrating waste materials, things that are abundant or surplus in our environment. I also do lots of educational work around food, which has been over the last few years. I run fermentation workshops using leftovers, and I do wild food walks where I help people work out which wild foods are edible. And I think it's really important to start thinking about how we can introduce some of these foods into our diet. The main project I want to talk about is Brixton Pound Cafe. Next slide, please. It was a pay-what-you-can community cafe based in Brixton, and we used surplus food that was saved from going to landfill, and we turned it into delicious vegetarian and vegan meals that were affordable for the whole community. The main aims of the project were to tackle food waste in the borough, to tackle income inequality in an area that was being regenerated and had a lot of marginalised communities in it, and also to socially engage lots of people in the area. So we ran extra things like yoga and life drawing, and we held parties and we did supper clubs. And really, for me, it was an amazing opportunity to kind of join the artistic, creative part of my brain with the sort of business side or hospitality side. And originally, I came from working in pubs, so I spent a lot of time working in sort of customer-facing roles with food and drink. And I thought it was really interesting to try and run a project that was more open, more accessible, but was also had a really strong environmental and ecological aim. So yeah, it was really important for me to provide a supportive space for people who were underrepresented in that particular, in the hospitality industry, but also within businesses. So I took on lots of volunteers, mainly young people in the area who went to SEN schools or who had learning disabilities or autism, and worked with them in a personal capacity and as their colleague, their boss, and we worked on the areas that they were very interested in. So I had one guy that was super interested in coffee, so spent lots of time working on that. For me, it was important that we opened up the space to provide opportunities for discussion around things like pay what you can as a model, but also to do with surplus food, waste food, how we were turning these into meals, how we were actually helping to diversify people's diet, and how we were really pushing for this idea of access to food for all. It's a human right to have access to food. And the pay what you can model was very exciting. It meant that people could access it not only with money, but also with skills. So people would maybe have a lunch and then help us wash up, or they would have lunch and then they would run a workshop for us. So kind of creating a more horizontal landscape, anti-hierarchy, that we can introduce more people in and think about alternative currencies. So the food that came in was predominantly, it was post-supermarket waste. So it was going towards landfill, and we would make lots of ferments, and we would process it in different ways with drying and dehydrating or making soups and stocks. We would give away food for free. We had lots of homeless people coming in, lots of people on low income or underemployed who were looking for meals, and we would just kind of distribute. The idea behind the pay what you can was that it was non-judgmental, so you didn't have to prove that you were in need. We would just give food regardless, and this created a lot of trust in the community between the patrons and myself and my staff, and it created a more fair environment for us to share knowledge and skills, ideas. So a lot of my other work is to do with fermenting, as I've said already. So I really see this as a very, very key way that we can take leftover food from supermarkets or from our fridges or even from the wild and use really basic traditional preservation techniques that it not only extend the lifespan of food and so stop it from going in the bin, but actually I feel radically transform the nature of the food itself. So if you like, it's been reincarnated. So a cabbage becoming a sauerkraut, this is something that is taken on a totally different flavor profile, and it has really, really good qualities of bacteria, good positive bacteria that increase the diversity within your gut. So it's kind of tasty and it's good for your diet, but it also really helps you build a very strong gut as well. So predominantly my work is about activism through doing, and I think food is a really key area where we can make change a lot of perceptions and bring together people with differing ideas to have discussion. I often say that I'm an amateur. I'm not an expert. I enjoy lots of different things, and I like trying out new techniques. So when I try and do workshops, it's very much about me just kind of creating a platform where people can bring their own ideas. Like they can have an equal footing. We can all share skills, share ideas, and all these things are, if someone takes away an idea of how to ferment food or preserve food, then that is a way that they will actively reduce the amount of food waste, and that will have a knock-on effect on the environmental impact of their diet.
Thank you, Rory. That's such an exciting
Yeah.
introduction to what you do. And what not only have you brought to us the way that Brixton Pound Cafe was structured amongst a more horizontal structuring, like organising around people, and it also brings together like different set of value systems, not only with like the different alternative currency that you're talking about, but also what we value as people out of each other and our time as well. I think this is a really important new perspective to be bringing into our work. And we also have some questions from the ambassadors, and I'll pass on to Nuha.
Hi, another question from us ambassadors, which is how has stigma towards using leftover or expired food affected sharing your work and your knowledge with other people?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We would normally not be using expired food because that obviously means that it's rotting. Rotting food is no good to anyone's diet. It's much better in the compost pile. So we have a lot of connections with local gardens, community gardens. In terms of the stigma around leftover food, I think that's something that's we've created ourselves. This idea of sort of perfect vegetables and perfect fruit. They almost look like cartoons. So I think the education really is more around where does the food come from and what does it look like when it comes out of the ground. In this way, by using lots of leftover materials in my workshops, it's kind of just showing you like these are all things that were thrown away and they're perfectly good, and we can give them a new life that will also increase the diversity of our diet, but also reduce food waste.
Great. And next up, we have Annie Mckinnon, who's an artist and researcher, to describe what you do with your work and how it relates to our topics.
Hiya. I'm Annie. I've been researching sustainability in relation to the fashion industry for several years now. I began being interested in this area after doing my BA, and now I'm doing an MA in fashion and working within the fashion industry. I've been seeing firsthand how many issues there are. So to begin looking at the key question in a society which isn't set up to make ethical choices, how do we begin changing to fairer, more environmentally friendly practices? I think it's key to understand how the fashion and textiles industry crosses over so many issues, from climate change to gender, race, politics, human rights and workers' rights. And understanding the interconnections between all of this is key. So for an idea of scale, it's estimated that 60 million people work in the garment manufacturing industry. 40 million alone are in Asia, and 80% of garment workers are women. So to start thinking about sustainability, I'm going to talk about two areas, which are greenwashing and the fashion supply chain. So when people talk about the fashion supply chain, this refers to all the links and steps from sourcing of raw materials to producing the textiles, sewing the garments, through transportation until they end up at shops of consumers. So many fashion brands are actually unable to trace this entire supply chain. Sometimes they're just not transparent about their practices. If you look at many supply chains, like now and historically, there's a lot of exploitation which happens at every step. A lot of theorists sort of pinpoint cotton manufacturing during the slave trade to be a sort of beginning step of how the global textiles and fashion economy has been shaped. You can see how exploitation has been part of the chain from the inception of it. At the moment, we've reached a point where the fashion industry is extremely unsustainable. And although this is more talked about, consumption, waste and exploitation are still rising. This has led to several ecological and sort of humanitarian disasters. So for example, the Aral Sea in Central Asia has largely dried up due to cotton farming, and There's a case that's often spoken about, the Rana Plaza disaster in 2013, where a garment factory collapsed and over 1,000 people were killed. And these are just showing how the Rana Plaza was producers for many Western high street and designer brands, and just sort of shows how everyone's choices have like really impacted different countries. So moving on to greenwashing and looking at how greenwashing is key to understand what brands are actually doing sustainable things. So if brands often use words such as sustainable or green or eco, used very vaguely and incorrectly to promote good brand images, this sort of providing misleading information is often called greenwashing. So examples of this can be claiming that certain textiles are more sustainable than others without providing any measurable data. Brands also do things like signing pledges, claiming that they're going to work towards sustainable targets and don't show any concrete evidence of doing so. Why this is so important to understand is that when brands start making claims like this, they sort of get away with corporate social responsibility and no actual change happens. So learning how to spot greenwashing is really important in transitioning towards a more sustainable system. I'm going to give the example of viscose, which is something it's a textile that's been often promoted as a sustainable fabric. Viscose is sometimes called rayon, sometimes it's labeled as bamboo. The textile is made from cellulose from trees, so it's often marketed as natural, plant-based, biodegradable and sustainable. However, because the demand for cellulose for the viscose has become so large, this has caused lots of deforestation. Most of the world's supply of the cellulose to create the viscose comes from Indonesia, Brazil and Canada. In Indonesia, there's a lot of evidence of endangered animals and native people being forced off their land to do such plantations. So there's different groups such as Canopy, which is a sustainable fashion non-profit. Them and people like Rainforest Action Network have been trying to work with brands to find cellulose from responsible sources and sort of talk about how viscose is coming from endangered and ancient forests. Viscose also uses a lot of chemical processes which are used to make the textiles, one of which is carbon disulfide. This is known to be toxic and a reproductive hazard, and a lot of this leaks from the process into the environment. So this example, such as viscose, really shows how you really need to look deeper into claims of what people are saying are sustainable, and that when sudden spikes of interest happen in a material, this can lead to sort of unregulated like things like deforestation happening. So there's lots of different groups like Canopy who are looking into how to make sustainable and responsible supply chains. For example, there's a company called Woolmark who looks at wool sustainability. There's also the Better Cotton Initiative, which looks at cotton and sustainability. And there's lots of places you can look for to learn about different labour rights, such as the Clean Clothes campaign and Labour Behind the Label. It's positive that this is becoming more and more in the media and people are talking about it more and pressuring brands into making genuine change. So I really encourage you all to really research more when you see brands claiming to be sustainable. Look into their practices, look into their responsibility sections on their websites. And then I'll just quickly show 3 slides of some projects I've been doing, looking at how I've been integrating sustainability into my design. So if I could quickly show the slides. Okay, so in this is an image of a tree hugger and a body bag of mud. I've been trying to sort of look at how to use humour and play within my work to sort of explore how sustainability can be linked with emotional sustainability. So connecting people with garments through play and collaboration. These are all my products are made from upcycled materials. So I've been trying to locate different waste streams in London. So these are all made from old sailing gear from London outdoor activity centres. So if you want to go to the next one. So this is my Pufferbead upcycling system, which is trying to create building blocks out of waste materials that you can weave together into multiple garments like Lego. So with this, people can continuously make different shapes. It can be home furnishings. All the scrap fabric is blended and made into the stuffing for the beads themselves. And then if we look at the final picture, this is using offcuts of British wool after manufacturing, using different things, different processes such as washing machine felting, needle felting to create sculptural forms. And the last picture on this slide is coated in bioplastic, which is made from agar. So trying to explore different ways of using waste offcuts of wool to change into new sort of plastic flexible coatings that are still biodegradable. So these are just several experiments I've been doing in materials, looking at how to integrate sustainability into my own design. So yeah, I hope this is quick introduction has had some interesting points. Do we move on to the questions?
Yes, thanks, Annie. That's fantastic to hear about all of your research, and it's great how you started with talking about also the raw materials, the supply chain, the human and ecological impacts as well. And what kind of really struck me was the way that you talked about the lack of transparency and encouraging us to also start doing the research ourselves and to prompt the different agents in the industry to do better. And what I want to ask you very briefly and quickly about is, what do you mean by emotional sustainability that you bring forward in your own products and your own work?
So emotional sustainability, which is also sometimes called emotional durability, is sort of trying to form a connection with a product, and in that way, through the emotional connection, there's longer value or longer use in a product. So for instance, like, I don't know, if like your grandma gave you some jewelry and it has a sort of emotional nostalgic connection, it's something you would treasure and keep. So trying to think about how can you integrate that into clothes to make a sort of slower cycle of going through clothes when the contemporary pace is so fast. So, you know, things like white clothes, once they get stained, people tend to not wear them. So trying to really think like, how can you integrate ways such as like co-design or play or like transformable garments to try and make some different connection to garments that is not just within a normal sports garment.
That's really important. It's kind of addressing our throwaway culture of one use kind of fast fashion, isn't it? We do have questions from our ambassadors. Can I pass on to Nuha to ask this question, please?
Hey, so just a question that we asked you, Annie, is what do you think the most effective way of finding out if a brand is sustainable is, and if you could give us that and an example of a sustainable brand which you like really recommend to everyone?
Yeah, so basically, if a brand is doing a lot of good work within sustainability, they will often be showing off about it because it is something that more and more consumers are interested in. Well, I'll link this in with the second question as well. An example of a brand that does a lot within sustainability is Patagonia. If you look at the Patagonia website, go into all the about section, there's so much data and like reports, and you can find like on most products, you can see what it's made of, the exact composition. They give so much information and they've been doing so for years. So if you compare that to like other brands' websites who are claiming to be sustainable, you can see like, are they actually doing what they say? How much data are they giving you? There's also a lot of different pacts people have signed. You can see in the corporate social responsibility page, if they've signed any pacts. It's important to see if they're like following up on it, like when did they sign it? Have they signed it just for like a good image, or are they actually making steps to do that? Yeah, I think just looking deeper into websites and obviously just internet searching the brand name, type in like brand name sustainability, brand name greenwashing. There's quite a lot of media, quite a lot of online sort of resources that are posting about whether or not brands are sustainable.
Thank you so much, Annie. And then we'll move on to our other speaker, Joycelyn Longdon, who is a climate researcher and also online educator. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really interesting listening to everybody else's stories. I first became interested in the climate when I was 16 and snuck out to my first ever environmental march. And I was really excited to feel like I was part of something bigger and taking action in line with my values. But when I got there, I saw a sea of people who did not look like me, and I felt confused as to why that was the case. It wasn't until years later, at 21, when I would write about and speak about the privilege of protest, that my experience made a bit more sense. Due to institutionalized racism or systematic racism, which are forms of racism that are embedded in normal practices within society and within society or within organizations, many people of color who work multiple jobs to survive and provide for themselves and their families. And I grew up in a family like this, with my mum working 3 jobs to provide for us. And that would mean that there was not really an option to take time off from work to get a doctor's appointment, let alone to engage in civil disobedience. It's a risk to miss a whole day's worth of pay, or even risk losing a job in order to protest. So I didn't fit in, and even at 17, once I'd moved out of my family home and transitioned to being quite a strict vegan at the time, I still didn't resonate with any of the experiences of those around me. Or I didn't really feel sort of a respect for the kind of oppressive nature or environment of the communities I wanted to be a part of. So I turned my back on the climate space, choosing to focus on racial and social justice, things that affected me directly, also I thought, and things that I felt that I could make a change in. And I started my creative platform called Black on Black, where I supported creatives of colour. And I also spent a lot of time finding my own spiritual practices that helped me, like yoga and meditation, painting and reading and writing, and walking and connecting with the natural world and learning more about the natural world around me. The climate movement at the time made me feel like those were not worthy endeavours in the fight for climate justice, but little did I know that deep down my actions were exactly what was needed and is still needed in today's movement. Finding my PhD, the application of AI to environmental risk, changed my perspective completely. And before I dive into what exactly that is, I'll tell you how. So around the time that I found my course, I had also started reading a lot of literature on the impacts of climate change on people living in the global south, places like Africa, India, and South America, and became aware of the concept of environmental racism, which is environmental injustice that occurs within a racial context, both in practice and policy. I began to understand the ways in which the most vulnerable people who had contributed the least to climate change were the first to suffer and suffered the worst in most cases, as well as learning about the barriers in the ways of people of colour living in more rich countries like the UK or the US in accessing nature, plastic-free shopping, or land. Looking back at the work I had been doing within myself, and in the wider social justice space, I couldn't unsee the intersection it had with climate justice. I had been doing climate justice work all along, and it just wasn't packaged in the expected way. I decided I wanted to continue my education in a way that would support people who look like me and those who are vulnerable and underrepresented in climate conversations around the world. After scrolling for hours trying to find a course that fit my intentions, and one that was funded, because there would have been no way I would have been able to afford it otherwise, I found the course I will be starting in only a few weeks. Break it down for you what exactly AI and environmental risk mean. So AI is a strand of computer science where you train machines to deal with huge data sets. And environmental risk is an academic way of saying climate change and relates to weather, climate and air quality, natural hazards and natural resources such as food, water and biodiversity. So how do these things go together? Well, there's a lot of data out there on how the climate is changing and affecting the planet and the people that live on it. In order to create solutions to support communities and change policy, researchers need to be able to process these huge data sets, sometimes as large as 1 million data points. And this would be impossible for humans to do by themselves or in a timely manner, which is very important with climate change, seeing as it's already here. An example of this and how this works is with renewable energy. So one huge issue with renewable energy is intermittence, which means that sometimes it can be delivered irregularly and drop out and will have to be backed up by fossil fuels. There's a great article from Columbia University that describes the kind of boundary pushing work being done at Stanford University as an example, where they're using AI to observe and analyze data from renewable power sources in California. And using this data, the AI can predict and react to energy outages and restore them quickly with little human involvement, making renewable energy much more efficient, reliable, and move further away from needing the help of fossil fuels. I have always been a disruptor, and so although the course that I'm doing does not have a focus on the kind of humanitarian side of climate change, I am ingraining it in my research, making sure that the experiences and knowledge systems of Indigenous and marginalised people around the world are embedded in algorithms and conversations surrounding climate change. Disruption can come in many forms, and coming back full circle, at the start of my talk, protesting and civil disobedience are not the only ways to do it. Lockdown has seen a transformation on social media. Transformation of social media to a space of education, and it was in lockdown that I started Climate in Colour, which is an online platform at the intersection of climate science and social justice, making climate conversations more accessible and diverse. I create accessible and diverse content that breaks down complex world issues or climate science concepts into bite-sized resources. I've made videos about the ways in which climate change is inherently racist, and these videos are meant to be accessible for a wide range of ages and education levels, breaking down wider concepts into bite-sized sections and using as many examples as possible to back up my research. But I also make infographics like the one that's been shown on the screen. And this infographic was all about sea level rise and the effects that it has on communities living in small island nations. I mix a range of facts and stats alongside case studies, which allows the impact of this climate risk to be fully understood by the people looking at the infographic. There are a lot of things we're not taught at school that are essential in forming the opinions we have and decisions we make growing up. There's also a lot of essential information hidden in academic papers that are either financially inaccessible or age or ability inappropriate. And I believe that disrupting the education space, as well as disrupting the social media space, turning it from something quite passive into something increasingly active, is one of the first steps into creating more informed citizens and creating a more just future. So yeah, happy to hop into some questions.
Thank you, Joycelyn. That was a really informative presentation of not only your experience when you were younger and starting to get involved in climate change issues, which I feel resonates with a lot of people, young people in this group, as well as the audience members who are joining, and what you touched upon involving uneven consequences of climate change and breaking down, I guess, like the terminology that is involved with climate research is a really important and invaluable asset to this discussion as well. And I think I'll hand it straight to one of our ambassadors for a question. Nana, do you have one for us, please?
Yeah, with your discussions of how climate change sort of school, what are your opinions on the recent increase in people skipping school for climate change protests?
I think that conversations around how people take climate action are very nuanced, and I guess that means sort of that it includes many different perspectives, and it's not just black and white. So for many students who might have a privilege of having parents that are very accepting or very unorthodox, or can teach them in different ways, or have experience within different sort of education fields and are themselves educated, it's a lot easier for them to skip school because it will have less of an impact on their daily routines, on their progress through school, and on their kind of future. But for a lot of students who maybe come from more difficult backgrounds, or really need school as a way to step out of a certain situation, whether that's low income or a background of abuse or something that's very difficult, that might just not be the right decision for them. And so I think for those who can, it's a great way to get the attention of governments and to raise awareness to the fact that climate change is going to affect the younger generation and that they are not happy about it. I think that's perfect. But I think that with talking about the action that people take towards climate change, we have to be understanding that many people are in different positions, have different accessibility to different actions, and that there are many different ways that you can contribute to the climate movement.
Excellent. Thank you, Joycelyn, Annie, and Sean Roy, for your brilliant presentations. You all come from different perspectives and experiences, but I do feel like there are so many overlaps as well in your work and how you want to move forward with this with everyone else. And so I'll bring together the rest of the ambassadors for everyone's question session. And so would we like to start with Hetal? You have a question for us, or?
Yep. So the first question for all three of you is, how has the pandemic affected what you do in relation to the environment?
So in lockdown, I've been locked down in Cornwall with my boyfriend's family rather than living where I'm from in London. And I like spending a lot of time in nature. And so lockdown, I guess for me, even though I've been working quite a lot, has meant that I have much more access to nature, which is a more privileged position than other people have been in lockdown. And that has been able to help me connect a lot more with the work that I'm doing. Climate in Colour did not exist before lockdown, and I had the ability to create that space within lockdown. And so I think I've been very privileged in lockdown to connect a lot more physically with nature, but also academically and socially with people who care about the environment, and actually connecting with the environment myself.
That's fantastic. Sean Roy, would you like to answer us next?
Yeah, so how has the pandemic affected what I do as work? I was working on a emergency food provision in Lambeth for 3 months. So I was cooking and distributing a range of people in the area, from young families to single parent families. I was also cooking and distributing food for the disabled and neurodiverse community. And, this was very difficult and tasking work, but it was also very rewarding, and worked with lots of incredible volunteers. For the last month, I was extremely lucky. I've been on a residency, and similar to Joycelyn, have been really reconnecting with nature and spending a lot of time outside. So I'm really grateful for that, and it's helped me reconnect with my practice and have some time to think about how I'm going to, take all this work that I've done and consider it and move forward.
Thank you, Sean Roy. And we have another question from Nana. Would you like to ask the question now, please?
In your career or lifetime, what would your dream accomplishment be?
I think education is really where I see my strong point, my benefit to other people. So more fermentation. I kind of imagine having maybe like a van, like driving around, educating people in a van, with solar panels and stuff. But growing food and also bringing people from cities, so thinking about young Black people who don't have access to growing, food growing, or even sometimes don't have access to green space, and educating outside of the city, so kind of improving those connections.
Thanks, Sean Roy. It's almost like bringing back the mobile libraries. And Annie, would you like to answer this question for us too?
Yeah, I think it's probably quite similar to what you've both said, but I'd like to sort of be more involved within education, but sort of education for free and sort of putting together resources within that. I'd also like to really focus a lot more of my research on Asia, because I think I find it quite hard to find resources sort of speaking about sustainability from that perspective within the fashion industry. Sort of really look into that and how I can, with my work, actually contribute something useful.
That's super. Now we'll swing back to Hessel for the next question.
So on a much larger scale of things, what do you picture as your perfect world or dream world?
This is a very hard question, I guess, just because I feel like there's no one way to live life, so I don't want to project anything on how I would see individual people in the world living. But I guess on a few key themes, people having access to nature, that is universal. People having access to healthy food, that's universal. And in whichever ways that people want to live their lives, whether that's with their consumption habits, that's with their creative practice, whether that's with their profession, that all of those are done in a way that has no net negative impact on either other people or the planet. And I feel like that's a very broad answer, but there's such a kind of multiplicity or plurality of ways that people can live life, but those are kind of three pillars that I guess would create a world that I think would be nice to live in.
Thank you, Joycelyn. And Sean Roy?
I see the world, the perfect world, as one that's beyond the current system of capitalism, one where we are thinking about how to take all the resources that we already have and how to repurpose them and redistribute. This would also include lots of education and skilling up for people so that they can have more agency in their life, make more decisions that benefit themselves and their communities. This world would also support many alternative forms of currency, like favors, artwork, labour, and kindness, and all exploitative work would be banished.
Yes, agreeing with that. And Annie?
I think it would be great if education was completely free and was something ongoing, like you could pop in and learn new skills at any point in your life. I guess that could be similar to what Sean said about sort of trade, skill sharing. I think sustainable products you shouldn't have to pay huge prices for. A lot of sustainable things are hugely expensive. So whether this is also through trade or, you know, there's some sort of tax break for companies who are doing more so they can make their products more like accessible to a wider community. Things like that, I guess. Just more understanding of like climate change alongside racism and all these issues at school, I think is incredibly important. I feel like, you know, these things were like, I never got taught about them at school. Even like most of my BA in fashion sustainability was sort of thought of as like, oh, this annoying thing they just randomly drop in at the end. So I think just having these discussions to be like really mainstream and like the norm.
Absolutely. I think it's great to have open discussions about these things with many perspectives. And we have one final question from the ambassadors, which I'll go back to Nana to ask us.
How can individuals tackle the climate crisis if they don't have the money to buy ethically made or sustainable produce?
That's a really good question, and I've done a lot of kind of research and writing around this topic, I guess of green consumerism, which is buying things that are sustainable or ethical, and it can be very misleading, especially when we consider that those who, there are studies done that show that those who identify themselves as green consumers, so feel like they are making decisions of buying and spending money on sustainable purchases, aren't necessarily more environmentally friendly than those who don't identify. And the reason that is just because the richer you are, if you have a larger house, you might travel more, you might commute longer distances in a private car rather than on public transport. There are many factors that mean that even if you think you're buying or investing in more green things, your carbon footprint is still probably higher than someone who is low income or who is just living in a more kind of lower impact life. And so I think that people shouldn't be worried or concerned if they don't have the ability to access or afford sustainably or ethically made products. I think what's important is understanding where the things you are buying that you need to buy are coming from, and doing research about where those things are coming from. And also, I think a lot of the time people are already doing environmentally friendly or consuming it in an environmentally friendly way without knowing it. So, for example, we have kind of trends of zero waste, so zero waste living. And that might seem, you know, I have to have a tin box for my lunch, and I need to have a glass water bottle, and I need to have beeswax wraps, and I need to have all of these things that I need to buy that are sustainable and ethically made. But if you grew up in maybe a South Asian or an African or an East Asian background, your parents probably had a hook on the wall that had all these plastic bags in it, and you use the plastic bag for like a shower cap and for a bin and for all of these different things. Or you were using the same ice cream tub from 10 years ago to pack your lunch, or you were using all of these things that at the time at school people probably thought that you were poor and not cool and didn't have all these, you know, new fancy things, but actually you were living a zero waste life. And so I think that the focus should be less on what can I buy and how can I like outwardly seem to be living a more sustainable life, and more about what are the decisions that I'm making that use what I have access to, that are not impacting other people badly. So whether that's reusing things that you already have, wearing clothes that you already have, it's much more kind of consuming to buy ethically made clothes rather than just keeping and looking after the clothes that you have already. They may not necessarily have come from an ethical, sustainable background, but if you have not got the accessibility to more sustainable or ethical products, instead of going out and buying them, just keep what you've got. Keeping your clothes well can do much more wonders than just buying more things, even though they're sustainable, if that makes sense. So yeah, just start and use what you've got, and look after your things, and don't buy things that you don't need. Yeah.
Yes, definitely, Joycelyn. That's a huge, massive agreement from me. And Annie?
Yeah, I think sort of touching on the point Sean just said about how the most sustainable thing is the thing you already have. I think it's crucial to understand that, I mean, a lot also just realizing that a lot of things that are branded as sustainable might not really be truly sustainable. Like, for instance, if you had, I don't know, a £5 pair of jeans and you've worn it for like 10 years compared to if you bought the most sustainable denim you can find and just wore it once. I mean, surely like the £5 pair is going to be more sustainable in the long run. So sort of understanding like it's what you're doing with the products, not like what you're buying, that's really making an impact. And then there's also lots of other actions you can do, like emailing brands, like talking to them on social media, trying to like sort of push like companies, or like, you know, it might be like a gallery you care about, like anything, just sort of emailing them, sort of trying to like urge them to sort of make more sustainable changes. I think, I mean, this is just speaking about the fashion industry. I think there really needs to be better legislation about the targets for sustainability. So, for example, Germany recently passed a law that holds German brands accountable for human rights abuses. They're trying to get the EU to do the same. However, in the UK last year, they had like a massive report called like Fixing Fashion, and it had like many points that people wanted to make laws, such as taxing garments 1p to learn to like fund more recycling, trying to strengthen checks on modern slavery, sort of trying to force producers to have more responsibility and hold brands accountable, but the UK government rejected all of them. So, you know, things like that's really important to start like writing to MPs, trying to like talk about these issues more and more, and hopefully some good will come out of more discussions about this.
Thank you. This has been actually a really resourceful and informative Q&A session, actually. And so I'd like to thank everyone for your presentations, and also thank the ambassadors for your questions. And this wraps up this section of the talk. Hello to all the speakers who have joined us just now, Sean, Rory, Joycelyn, and also Annie, and to our ambassadors who have joined us for this section, Alex, Sulphur, and we also have Nana on the voice chat as well. And so in this part, we really encourage our audience members to send in any questions that you have for our speakers. And you can do this in the Q&A section, which has just been highlighted, and that's at the bottom of your right-hand side. There are some questions already, and I can do it so that we alternate between the Q&A box and then also the ambassador questions. So let's start with one of the Q&A box questions to the speakers. Do you think big influencers have a responsibility to reinforce sustainable fashion industries? Maybe Annie, you would like to start on this because it's kind of your field.
Well, I guess kind of we do live in an era where influencers do have, you know, quite a large impact on the way that the general public thinks. So I think it is important that they do like use their voice and platforms to sort of inform people of anything, or to try and promote brands that are sustainable.
Yep, definitely. Would any of the other speakers like to pop in on their answering that question?
Yeah, I think it's very important thinking about the sort of platform that these people have and using it in a very responsible and fair way. That, you know, a lot of people follow what they do and take influence from them in the way that they live their lives. So kind of there's an unspoken responsibility to those people.
Hey, I feel like, yeah, I agree with everyone else about the fact that influencers do have a responsibility to promote positive kind of development on the planet, but that everyone should have their own agenda and understand that they're probably not going to agree with every single person on the planet, and to, you know, influencers aren't the last word, and that the messages that they promote should be taken as part of a wider action of education, so that every one of us as an individual can make our own decisions, rather than taking influencers' words for gospel, because they are just other human beings, just with more followers. They're not different to you, who is left. They are fallible, and so I think everything that everyone says should be taken with a pinch of salt and backed up with further research. And if you agree with them, that's great, and if you don't, then that's also great.
I think those are really great points. Thank you for that. And then we'll pop over to our ambassadors. Sulphur, would you like to go first with your question?
So this question is from Isabel, and it's for Sean Roy. Have you watched Down to Earth with Zac Efron on Netflix? It has a few episodes on food security and diversity, which you would probably like. If you have, what did you think of it?
I actually haven't watched that. I'm not hugely a huge fan of Netflix, to be honest. So if you could tell me the name of the program again, I'd be
it's called Down to Earth with Zac Efron.
Oh, okay, Zac Efron. Wow. Okay. Is he like a green? Is he green celeb now?
I don't know. Maybe.
Right.
Potentially. Yeah.
I haven't, but I hope that it's made in good faith, and I'm sure he's found some interesting things out.
Thank you.
I think that question flowed quite nicely from our previous Q&A question, which was about celebrity culture as well. And yeah, shall we have another one from our Q&A box? Let's see, let's go through them. These are looking really great, and they're so varied as well. One of them says, what was the hardest part of setting up or starting your respective projects? Any challenges that you were facing and overcame that you would like to share?
I think for me, I didn't really face any challenges starting this project, and I feel like a lot of the time when people talk about their projects, it always seems like they just magically started it and it worked. But I think the reason why this project, Climate in Colour, was pretty smooth sailing was because of all the other projects I'd done in the past. I have worked in the creators and a lot within social justice and racial justice, and a lot of those projects have been much more difficult to start up. And so I don't know what perspective this person's asking it from, but if it's to figure out whether you should start your own project, I would say definitely start and try and get involved in this, because to some extent it is a numbers game, and everything that you learn from each of those projects will influence the next project you do. So I've worked on a lot of different projects before that have not been very successful, or the message has not been received as well, or maybe the way in which I'm sending the message isn't reaching the right people. But that has all led to lots of learnings, which has meant that Climate in Colour has been able to kind of come from a place that understands how to communicate things to people in an accessible way. And used all the kind of learnings that I've taken from other very difficult and failed starting projects.
That's a really great insight. It's seeing that there's value in all of these steps that you're going through. Annie, do you have anything you'd like to input?
I think, well, I don't really feel like I really know what I'm doing. I feel like I've been sort of jumping around doing lots of different bits, still trying to like figure out how to cohesively do something useful with everything. So I guess I don't really know. But I guess the greatest challenge for me, I think, is definitely time. Like, obviously, I'd love to spend all day on my own stuff doing research, but I like work basically full time. So it's very hard to sort of have the energy to do something like good after work, I suppose.
I think that resonates with quite a lot of people, Annie. How about you, Sean Rory?
Well, the Brixton Pound project, in a way, was very similar to my sort of my broad art practice, but also had elements of the hospitality labour and work that I'd been doing over the past sort of previous 6 years. And I came into a model that was already existing. You know, someone was already running a cafe, so I didn't have to start from scratch per se. But because I saw it as an extension of my art practice, and therefore an extension of who I am as a person and my principles, I guess the most difficult thing was trying to implement some of the ways of working, so collaborating and, you know, working with volunteers, working with surplus food, learning how to cook. I didn't really know how to cook before I did this job, so I was very much learning like on the spin, which was very challenging, but also incredibly, you know, exciting, and feel like it gave me a huge part of who I am now.
That's amazing. Not only learning to cook on a job, but learning to cook for so many people as well. That's fantastic. I'll hand over to our ambassador, Alex, who has the next question, please.
Hi everyone. So I have a question from our ambassador Nuha for Annie, though of course everyone else's opinions are welcome. And the question is, can popular fashion brands such as Reformation remain ethical if demands are high?
I think it's really about balance. Obviously, I think it's really important for big popular brands to make accessible, sustainable clothing for people, but there's lots of different models you can approach that doesn't involve just selling. So for instance, if you offer free repairs in your shop, that's like a really good way. If big stores are more responsible in sort of organizing recycling of clothing. But then there's also the problem that the whole trend system basically makes clothes outdated immediately. And a way of making clothes affordable is by doing big orders to factories. That's how you can reduce the cost to make things more accessible to people. But then if you're ordering a lot and not selling it, then immediately next season, getting rid of that stock, that's not very sustainable. So it really depends on like the business model, like sort of in tandem with all other actions. But then another thing I'd say is if you've been following like Reformation recently in the news, they've been called out for a lot of racism within their business. So obviously there are other ethical issues that are a problem within that brand. So yeah, it's tricky, but like obviously it's necessary for that step to be taken.
And it's really good to be alert on the different types of issues that a company might be involved in, as you say, not only ecological, but also the human impacts as well. Would either of the other speakers like to chip in on that, or should I move on to the next question? Thumbs up for the next question. Or Sean, oh, was that a yes? Actually, there's quite a popular question in the Q&A box for Sean Rory, actually. Do you have a simple fermentation recipe that people can start off with? Maybe in the interest of time, maybe you can name the titles of them.
Yeah, sure. Well, the most basic one that I would advise anyone to have a go at is to make sauerkraut. You don't need any ingredients other than cabbage and some sea salt. And I can tell you the recipe now. You just need to shred the cabbage as small as you can into strips, and then you add 3% of the total weight in salt, and then you massage it for 5 minutes in a bowl, let it sit, have a cup of tea, go back to it, massage it for 5 minutes more, and then pack it in a jar so that there's no air bubbles. That's pretty much it.
Actually, that was
also, yeah.
No, that was fantastic because it was actually quite a short recipe and very concise. I'd like to move over to Nana, who has a third question from the ambassadors. And I think Nana's calling in, so I'll give it a couple more seconds. I think in the meantime, whilst we're waiting, we can do a question from the Q&A box. So one of the quite popular upvoted ones is, do you think Western populations would benefit from trying to adopt practices that Indigenous people in other countries live by and try to reduce their environmental impact?
This is a really good question. I think that what's important here to understand is between different regions of the world and how it can be just as exploitative to take ideas of living from countries in the global south or from indigenous populations as importing our own ideas to those same countries. So ordinarily we would think that it would be a sort of replicating colonial behaviours to sort of import Western science and Western ways of thinking to indigenous communities. But if anyone is really interested and wants to kind of challenge themselves, you can read a paper called Post-Colonial Compute, a Tactical Survey. And don't worry if you don't understand all of it. It is a taxing academic paper, but it really goes into why this kind of idea of Western populations learning from and adapting indigenous practices to a Western way of life to support the Western world's kind of continuation of success and ability is quite exploitative. And the indigenous community should have the agency in indigenous practices without any sort of input from the West. And a way to describe this would be kind of to liken it to appropriation. So for years, for millennia, from colonial times, indigenous populations have not been allowed to practice their own indigenous practices. One big example is both the fires in Australia and in California that are happening now. Indigenous populations have not been allowed to practice cultural burning, which is a practice of taking undergrowth and taking out dead branches and trees and burning them at the right times of year to stop huge wildfire. And this was a practice that was suppressed and kind of defined as primitive by European colonists at the time. And so to now kind of go back and ask to kind of use those practices would be seen as appropriative, because those communities have been persecuted for those very same practices. So I think the question is the West.
Sorry, just to cut. I absolutely agree with you, Joycelyn, and that we really should consider what the motives of these Western populations would be in the first place. Just to correct, because I've had a response in the Q&A that the question was actually meaning practices of Western populations that are indigenous to that.
Oh,
so that was partly me reading it wrong as well. But I think the answer that you gave was fantastic. It was perfect. In order for us to understand different global points of views as well. So yeah, I think that if any of the other speakers would like to answer on that, or how looking back into the history of looking at older practices. For example, Sean, Rory, you look at fermentation, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I can't be anywhere near as eloquent as Joycelyn, but I think fermentation and food preservation historically came from peasants and land workers. You know, it was a practice of poor working class families, people of the land that would have to look after their harvest and go through some processes to make sure that it lasted through the winter, over the Hungry Gap. And I guess my practice is about continuing those that have either been recorded through voice or through writing or through images, but also to kind of consider how we can use this surplus food, this waste food, this abundance of food. So we're looking at kind of fixing a problem of the wasteful society with these kind of traditional preservation techniques.
Thank you. And Annie, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just add one little quick point, because I think everyone's sort of answered it very well. I think if we're talking about learning about own countries, I think learning sort of what materials are local or can grow in your country is so important. So just for example, if you talk about wool, there's so much British wool is unused because it's coarser than most other wools. So most wool used in UK is imported from Australia. So there's a huge waste happening there, and British wool is very, very cheap because no one wants to use it. So that's a huge stream of fiber that no one's really using. And just funny anecdotes, wool used to be used as compost in the past, things like that are quite interesting to learn about. People also used to mix wool with paint and spray it as a way to cover up bald patches, which I also find quite fun. But there's so many things you can do with stuff that does grow in the UK, but everything is imported.
That's really interesting. We'll zip back to Nana now to see if the question's still there. Nana?
Yes. Hello. Somewhat related to the previous question. This is intended for Joycelyn, but it'd be good to hear all of the speakers' opinions on this. What are your opinions on how the prioritization of land for food agriculture affects the native biodiversity of the land?
Thank you for that question. this is a question that taps on how interlinked very different systems are in the world. And so a lot of Indigenous communities are farmers. A lot of the global south, the main proportion of their GDP comes from agriculture. And this is kind of a main way that people can make money. But if we take somewhere like Ethiopia, for example, which used to have one of the most expansive forests kind of in the world, its forests have been depleted to only 3% remaining of the original forest. And that has come from encroachment, so more agricultural grazing from stock, basically eating the forest down. And these forests are so biodiverse, and they're not only biodiverse, but act as huge spiritual centers for specifically the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And so you have this balance where this is kind of the main way that people can make money from agriculture and for land for agriculture, but it also impedes or stops them from being able to keep their biodiversity, which is seen as sacred. And I don't have the answers to how that can be brought into more balance, but it is good to highlight the fact that because of the dependency on exports from countries in the global south, or the dependency of imports, as Annie just said, from the global north, biodiversity is put into kind of peril, but also people's livelihoods are put into peril at the same time. I hope that makes sense.
That was a really great insight. Would any of the other speakers like to answer that as well?
Yeah, I was just thinking about farming in the UK, and particularly about how moving practice away from commercial agriculture towards sort of progressive and restorative practices like permaculture, organics and biodynamics is really pushing the conversation in the way of seeing humans as part of the land and how we integrate ourselves with non-human bodies. And so in that way, like, we are forming a collaboration with, you know, a lot of wild plants, and we can, with permaculture, we can support these kind of natural orders that happen. For instance, companion planting, so you have a plant that deters bugs from the plant that you want to eat, and then you can introduce different types of insects into your plot that will kind of eat aphids and things like that. So yeah, not on the same scale, but I think on a smaller scale, you know, regenerating the soil and harvesting, like sharing the harvest and kind of putting energy and love and money back into the soil is very important on a smaller scale.
That's really important. It's like finding your companion species in biodiversity as well as the people around you. Annie, do you have one more thing to add?
Don't really know that much about farming, to be honest, but I would say I think there's some sort of interesting work being done in sort of researching other ways to grow like food or fabric. So like people looking at seaweed and algae and or mushrooms, like things that like you can grow in different places that you don't really need land for, and like how those can be introduced as like different foods or fibers. I think that's like a really interesting like area to look into as well.
Thank you. And I think we have to wrap up now because of the time, but we would like to ask each of our speakers to leave us with something that I guess you want us to think about, to resonate amongst the young people. So a takeaway basically for us to leave with. Joycelyn, would you like to start with one?
Yeah, of course. I say this quite a lot to people, and I said it at the end of one of the last workshops I did, which is that this space can seem really daunting and really scary and really depressing at times, but actually our generation, and I think I'm still probably in the same generation as some people here, maybe one generation above, but the fact that we're even gathered here talking about these topics, interested, questioning, and really trying to understand our own privileges or our own gaps in knowledge should be empowering to you, because many generations before have gone through life without questioning or self-reflection. That should be an empowerment to the fact that we are going to make a change as a generation. And even if these systems and concepts seem so wide and out of our own reach, that actually, especially looking at how different me, Sean and Annie are, the kind of work we're doing in such siloed spaces, but how they come together and intersect, should hopefully give you kind of empowerment to feel like whatever role you play in the climate movement, whether that's as an academic, whether that's as a activist, that's as a artist or cook, that you do have a space within the climate movement, and that by talking in this sort of interdisciplinary way with lots of other people doing different things, that you really have a lot more grease to our elbows to actually make a difference in this space. So yeah, that would be my takeaway.
That was very empowering. And Annie?
I'd say, yeah, it's amazing that everyone's asking such like incredible and smart questions and sort of really going in the right way of thinking and questioning how we live and society. I'd say really make the most out of all the free learning resources on the internet. Like there's so much you can learn just from the internet. Like you don't need to have like degrees and whatever to like sort of try and learn more about climate change and what you can do. And also don't trust any adverts. That's it for me.
Thank you, Annie. And Sean Rory?
I don't think I'm going to be concise or as cutting as the other two, but I've been thinking about how it's really important to put down boundaries and find out who you are, and then you can begin to build your principles around that. And once you start finding other people who share those principles, then you've really got a really interesting collaboration going on. And for me personally, like I am adamant that I need to protect who I am as an amateur, and not fall into becoming part of the system that I'm trying to work against in some instances. So I'm thinking about how we can work with nature rather than against it.
That's super. Thank you, everyone. And the conversation doesn't stop there. We also have some illustrations that some of the ambassadors have been doing alongside these discussions. And here they are. And so we have illustrations from Steph, this one is. And so each of our speakers have their portraits. And also Tumi for the Pay What You Can Cafe. These are beautiful. This one's more about the sustainable clothing. Amazing. Thank you to our illustrators, and also thank you again to our ambassadors who have joined us for our chats today. In writing this session, we had Nana, Sulfa and Alex, and also in the introduction we had Victor, Yatunda and Hetal. And yes, that's the last thing I would like to tell everyone is to sign up to the newsletter, where this project is continuing, the conversations are carrying on, and we hope that we can all carry on sharing with each other and have a brilliant kind of productive, generative conversation that moves towards a much more, I guess, just future with our climate change crisis. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. The link for the newsletter is shown on the screen now. And thank you again to our speakers, Joycelyn, Annie, and Sean Rory.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.